She was only 3 years old when she was taken, and for 18 long years her mother never stopped searching. But no one could have predicted where she'd resurface, right back at the very playground where it all began. Before I tell you what happened, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? I read every single comment, and I truly love seeing our community interact. The sound of rusted chains creaked softly in the wind, each sway of the old swing carrying a whisper from the past. The late afternoon sky above Portland was a cold sheet of gray, heavy with clouds that seemed to press down on the quiet streets. A faint drizzle blurred the outlines of the pine trees that surrounded the small neighborhood playground. Their dark needles shimmered with moisture, and the scent of wet earth and metal filled the air. The slide's faded blue paint was chipped, revealing spots of dull aluminum, and the merry-go-round, long unused, was still as a frozen clock. A thin mist clung to the ground, curling around the weathered wooden bench that sat crooked near the sandbox. That bench had been there for decades, its surface scarred by initials carved with pocket knives and hearts drawn in shaky lines. Somewhere, faintly, a dog barked in the distance, the sound muffled by the damp air. Every so often a car would pass on the road beyond the chain-link fence, tires hissing over wet asphalt, but no one looked in. This playground was mostly forgotten now. Only the occasional passerby stopped to glance, and when they did, it was never for long. But today, something in the air felt heavier. A presence, an undercurrent, like the way the air stills before a storm. A woman stood at the far edge of the playground, her black coat pulled tight around her frame, the hood shadowing most of her face. Her boots were wet from walking the neighborhood streets, and the tips of her fingers were pale from the cold. She didn't move for a long time, only watching. Her gaze lingered on the swing set, and the slight tilt of her head made her look as if she were listening for something only she could hear. Her name was Sarah Carter. She had told herself that she was only passing through, that this was just another stop before the bus station. But when she had turned the corner and saw this place, her feet stopped moving. Something in her chest had tightened, something deep and wordless. And now, standing here, she realized she had been holding her breath for minutes. The drizzle turned to a fine mist, and the faint metallic smell of rain mixed with the faint sweetness of decaying leaves. Sarah's eyes traced the playground's edges, the low fence, the sagging basketball hoop, the patch of grass that seemed unnaturally flat, as if it had been pressed down for years. Her gaze snagged on the swing set again, on the leftmost swing, the one that leaned slightly inward. And then, without knowing why, she felt her pulse quicken, a memory, a flash. Not a clear one, not yet, just a smear of color, red fabric, the sound of laughter, a high-pitched voice calling her name. She blinked hard, and the image vanished, but the echo of it remained, like the ghost of a song you can't quite place. A group of children ran past the entrance, their sneakers splashing in the shallow puddles along the sidewalk. Their voices carried high and bright through the damp air, and Sarah's eyes followed them instinctively. A little girl in a yellow raincoat stopped at the gate, glanced at her for just a moment, then ran to catch up with the others. The gate clanged shut behind them. Sarah stayed where she was. Her heart was beating too fast now. Her palms were damp inside her gloves. She didn't understand why she felt this way, like something inside her was about to break open. She had never been here before, at least not that she could remember, but the truth was she had. Only she didn't know it yet. Far across the street, a man in his 60s watched her from inside a parked sedan. His hands rested on the steering wheel, unmoving, his eyes locked on her. The faint glow of the dashboard lit his face in the dim light, but from where she stood, Sarah couldn't see him. He didn't start the engine. He didn't move at all. The mist grew thicker, curling along the fence, wrapping around the rusted metal bars like pale fingers. Somewhere above, a crow cawed sharply and then fell silent. Sarah stepped forward, just one step, then another. The soft crunch of wet gravel beneath her boots sounded unnaturally loud in the stillness. She reached out, her gloved hand brushing the cold, damp chain of the swing. The metal bit through the fabric, the chill seeping into her skin. And that was when it hit her. Another flash, sharper this time. A woman's voice shouting, the blur of motion, the swing in front of her swaying violently. Her breath caught, and for a split second she felt 3 years old again. Small, vulnerable, the world towering over her. She pulled her hand back quickly, almost as if burned. The sound of the chains lingered in her ears long after she let go. Behind her, the man in the car adjusted his grip on the steering wheel. His jaw tightened. He had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. Sarah Carter had never been good at staying in one place for too long. She told herself it was just her nature, restless, curious, unwilling to let roots grow too deep. But the truth was harder to admit. She didn't know where she truly belonged. At 21, she had lived in 6 different towns across 3 states. She worked just enough to get by, saving little, moving on when the walls of a place began to feel too close. She wasn't chasing anything specific, but she was running from something, though she couldn't have said exactly what. Her latest job was at a small cafe in Astoria, Oregon, a coastal town where tourists drifted in during summer and locals nursed their coffee through the long, wet winters. The cafe smelled perpetually of espresso and cinnamon rolls, its windows fogged from the constant drizzle outside. Sarah worked the morning shifts, her hair pulled into a loose braid, her apron often dusted with flour. Her boss, Marcy, liked her well enough. Sarah was punctual, quiet, and could memorize complicated coffee orders without writing them down. But Marcy had also noticed something odd. Sarah never spoke about her family, not once, not even in passing. When customers asked where she was from, Sarah would smile faintly and say, "All over," before changing the subject. The truth was, her earliest memories didn't start until she was 4 years old. Before that, it was like a blank wall. Margaret Collins, the woman who had raised her, always told her that her biological mother had left when Sarah was very little, and that she had been taken in out of kindness. But Sarah never saw any paperwork, never saw photos from before age 4, never met anyone from that earlier life. She had long since stopped asking. Margaret wasn't the kind of woman who welcomed questions. Margaret had been strict, practical, and fiercely protective, sometimes too protective. She kept Sarah out of certain neighborhoods, away from certain people. She never explained why. Their relationship had always been a strange mix of closeness and distance. Sarah owed her everything, but deep down she felt there was a piece missing. At night sometimes, Sarah would dream of a park. It wasn't like any park she had been to as a child with Margaret. In her dreams, the air was damp and smelled faintly of metal. There were swings, yes, but they were higher, older, and the ground beneath them was worn into deep grooves. She always woke from those dreams unsettled, as if she had been somewhere important but couldn't remember why. She had told no one about those dreams. A week before she ended up in Portland, Sarah had received a letter. No return address, just her name, written in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a single sentence. "Do you remember the playground?" No signature, no explanation. She had read the note over and over, her pulse racing. She didn't remember telling anyone about the recurring dreams. She didn't even consciously remember a playground before age 4, only the dream's hazy imagery. But something about the letter felt urgent. So she left. Packed a single duffel bag, told Marcy she needed a break, and boarded a bus heading east. Portland had been a stopover, nothing more, or at least that's what she told herself. But when she turned a corner and saw the playground from her dreams standing exactly as it had appeared in her mind, she froze. That was hours ago. She had spent the rest of the day wandering nearby streets, ducking into small diners and bookstores to avoid the rain. She kept telling herself she should just keep moving, catch the next bus. And yet, her feet brought her back here, back to the rusted swings and the crooked bench. Margaret Collins lived 200 miles away now, in a small town near the Washington border. She had called Sarah twice in the past week, leaving short, clipped voicemails asking when she would be done with this wandering. Sarah hadn't called back. Margaret wasn't cruel. She had given Sarah food, shelter, and education. But there had always been something unspoken between them, a wall Sarah wasn't allowed to climb. And the older she got, the more she realized that wall might be hiding something she wasn't supposed to see. When Sarah was 9, she had found an old photo tucked into the back of a kitchen drawer. It was faded and bent, showing a little girl in a red coat standing in front of a swing set. The girl's hair was longer than Sarah's had been at that age, but the eyes looked like hers. She had asked Margaret about it, and Margaret's face had gone pale. She took the photo, muttered something about it being a friend's child, and Sarah never saw it again. That memory had stayed with her. And now, standing in the same place from that photo, though she didn't yet consciously realize it, her stomach knotted in a way she couldn't explain. Across town, in a small apartment cluttered with old case files, Detective Tom Harris was making his evening coffee when the phone rang. He didn't recognize the number, but he answered anyway. "You're not going to believe this," a voice said. It was a former colleague from the force. "I think she's back." Harris set the mug down slowly. "Who?" There was a pause. "The Carter girl. I just got a call from a neighbor near the old playground. Said they saw a young woman standing there for a long time today. Said she looked just like her mother." Harris felt the years fall away. He could see the missing poster in his mind, the headlines, the press conferences. 3 years old, taken in broad daylight, no witnesses who could give a clear description. He had chased leads for months, then years, and now. "Send me the address," Harris said, his voice steady, but his hand gripping the phone tighter. That night, Sarah stayed in a cheap motel off Sandy Boulevard. The walls were thin, the hum of the neon sign outside flickering through the curtains. She lay on the bed fully dressed, staring at the ceiling, the letter still in her pocket. She read it again and again until the words blurred. She told herself she wasn't afraid, but the truth was, she had never felt more exposed. Somewhere outside, a car slowed near the motel. She didn't get up to look, but her heartbeat quickened. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving the city washed clean, but cold. Thin rays of sunlight cut through the clouds in brief, reluctant moments, glinting off puddles that mirrored the bare branches above. Sarah stepped out of the motel, her duffel bag slung over one shoulder, the folded letter in her coat pocket. She didn't know why she was still here. She could have caught a bus east last night. But the thought of leaving made her feel restless, like walking away from a door half open. She bought a coffee from the gas station next door and started walking. Her route was aimless at first, drifting through side streets and quiet residential blocks, but her feet, as if drawn by an invisible thread, began leading her toward the playground again. When she arrived, the place was empty. No children, no parents, just the soft hiss of wind through the pines and the occasional rattle of the loose swing chains. Sarah stood at the gate for a long moment before stepping inside. This time, she noticed things she hadn't before. The far corner of the playground had a patch of ground where the grass was sparse, the dirt hard-packed. Near the bench, carved deeper into the wood than the rest, were the initials LC. The letters made something tighten in her chest, though she didn't know why. She moved toward the swings and stopped abruptly. The left swing, the one she had touched yesterday, was damp from the rain, but there was a faint, fresh shoe print in the mud just beneath it, not a child's shoe print, larger, adult-sized, and the tread was sharp, as if from a boot. Sarah glanced over her shoulder, scanning the street beyond the fence. No one was there, but the back of her neck prickled as if someone was watching. At the same time, Detective Tom Harris sat in his car across from the playground, binoculars resting in his lap. He had arrived early, hoping she would return. He wasn't sure what he'd say if she saw him. How do you tell someone they might be the answer to an 18-year-old missing child case? He decided he'd watch for now. Through the binoculars, he saw her pause at the swings, looking down at the ground. She was aware of something. He could tell by the way her posture changed. Harris's phone buzzed. It was his former partner, Elena Ruiz. "You're not going to like this," she said. "I ran the name you gave me, Sarah Carter. There's no birth record for her in the state until she was 4 years old. And get this, the address listed back then belonged to Margaret Collins." Harris exhaled slowly. "That's exactly what I was afraid of." That afternoon, Sarah went to a small diner near the park to warm up. She ordered a sandwich she didn't really want and sat near the window, the letter spread open on the table. She kept tracing the handwriting with her finger, trying to imagine who had sent it. Halfway through her meal, a man in his 40s with a baseball cap sat at the counter. He didn't order food, just coffee. But after a few minutes, Sarah noticed he was watching her in the reflection of the glass behind the counter. When she glanced directly at him, he looked away. She told herself she was imagining it, but when she left the diner, she caught sight of him again. Across the street now, leaning against a lamp post. Her pace quickened. She turned a corner. When she risked a glance back, he was gone. That night in the motel, Sarah heard footsteps outside her door around midnight. Slow, deliberate. They stopped right in front of her room. She sat up in bed, holding her breath, listening. The steps stayed there for what felt like minutes, then moved on. The next morning, there was something slipped under her door. A photograph. It was the same photo she'd found as a child in Margaret's kitchen drawer. The little girl in the red coat, standing in front of the swings. On the back, written in the same handwriting as the letter, were 3 words, "You were here." Detective Harris had spent the night combing through his old case files. The Carter case was one of those that never left him. He still remembered the mother's voice cracking during the first press conference, the desperation in her eyes. Linda Carter had insisted her daughter had been taken, but without witnesses or evidence, the trail went cold quickly. Now, holding a printout of Sarah's current driver's license photo next to an age progression image from years ago, Harris knew there was no question. They were the same person. The problem was, if she'd been raised by Margaret Collins, the question became, how had Margaret gotten her? The following day, Sarah returned to the playground again, driven by something she couldn't name. She sat on the crooked bench staring at the swings, the initials LC beneath her fingertips. A shadow fell across her. "You look like you know this place," a voice said. She turned to see an elderly woman with a grocery bag, her eyes sharp despite her age. "Haven't seen you around here before," Sarah hesitated. "I used to live nearby, I think." The woman studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You've got your mother's eyes." Sarah blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" But the woman had already started walking away. That evening, Sarah received another envelope slipped under her motel door. No postage, no return address. Inside was a small silver locket. She opened it to find a tiny photo of a woman she didn't recognize, and a folded piece of paper with an address written in the same familiar handwriting. She didn't know it yet, but the address was for a house just 3 blocks from the playground, the house where she had been taken 18 years ago. Sarah didn't go to the address right away. She spent most of the next morning pacing the motel room, the locket on the bed in front of her. The small silver hinge creaked each time she opened and closed it, as if it too carried the weight of years. She kept staring at the woman's face inside, a gentle smile, eyes that seemed familiar in a way she couldn't quite explain. By noon, she decided she couldn't ignore it any longer. Pulling her hood over her head, she slipped the locket into her pocket and walked the 3 blocks toward the address. The house was small, single-story, with peeling white paint and a chain-link fence that sagged in one corner. The yard was overgrown, wet leaves piled against the porch steps. A faded tricycle lay on its side in the grass, its red paint almost entirely worn away. Sarah stood at the gate for several moments before opening it. Each step up the walkway felt heavier than the last. When she knocked, there was no immediate answer, just the faint sound of a television somewhere inside. After a long pause, the door opened a crack. An older man peered out, his face lined, his eyes wary. "Can I help you?" Sarah hesitated. "I think I used to live here." The man's brow furrowed. He glanced over his shoulder before stepping outside and pulling the door closed behind him. "You'd better go," he said quietly. "There's nothing for you here." "Wait," Sarah said, but he was already turning away. As she walked back down the street, her pulse thudded in her ears. She didn't know why, but she was sure the man had recognized her. That afternoon, she went to the public library. If she couldn't get answers from people, maybe she could find them in records. She logged on to one of the old desktop computers and began searching for anything tied to the address. The name Carter, the playground. After an hour, she found an old newspaper article. The headline made her stomach twist. 3-year-old girl vanishes from local playground. Police search ongoing. The photo that accompanied the article showed a smiling child in a red coat. Her coat, her face. Sarah stared at the image until the words on the page blurred. She skimmed the article. Her mother, Linda Carter, had reported her missing in the late afternoon. No clear description of the suspect. Witnesses had seen a man with a dark jacket near the swings, but nothing more. The case had gone cold within months. Her hands trembled as she printed the article, folding it into her bag. Meanwhile, Detective Harris was growing restless. Watching from the periphery was no longer enough. That evening, he approached the motel. He didn't knock on her door, just slipped a note under it. "You're not alone in this. Meet me at the diner tomorrow morning." Sarah didn't sleep much that night. She kept hearing the footsteps from 2 nights ago, kept picturing the man in the diner watching her. By morning, she was half convinced meeting a stranger was a bad idea. But curiosity outweighed caution. At the diner, she recognized him immediately, older, weathered, but with eyes that had seen too much. He introduced himself simply. "Tom Harris. I used to be a detective here." He slid a manila folder across the table. "I've been looking for you for 18 years. Inside were photographs, her missing poster, age-progressed images, notes from interviews. She scanned them quickly, her throat tightening. "This is you," Harris said, tapping the missing poster. "Your name at the time was Sarah Carter. You were taken from that playground when you were 3 years old." Sarah leaned back, shaking her head. "That's not possible. I've lived with Margaret since I was 4. She told me—" "She lied," Harris said gently. "I can't prove she was the one who took you. But she had you, and there's no record of an adoption." The next few days were a blur of half-answers and dead ends. Sarah went back to the house twice, but the old man never answered the door again. She tried talking to neighbors, most of whom had moved in long after the disappearance. One woman, though, remembered the Carters. "They were good people," the woman said. "Your mom? She never stopped looking for you. Kept your room exactly the same for years. Then one day, she moved away. Couldn't stand being here anymore." Sarah asked if she knew where Linda Carter had gone. The woman shook her head. "Somewhere out of state. Last I heard, she remarried." Sarah's search wasn't without danger. One evening, walking back from the library, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned quickly, but the street was empty. A moment later, A car passed slowly, its windows tinted too dark to see inside. She stepped into a store until it was gone. That night, another envelope appeared under her door. Inside was a single slip of paper with the words, "Stop asking questions." The handwriting was different this time, harsher, hurried. Harris was hitting his own walls. The department wouldn't reopen the case without new evidence. And Margaret Collins was keeping a low profile. Still, he dug deeper, pulling phone records, old addresses, even tax documents. Something odd emerged. In the months after Sarah's disappearance, Margaret had received several large cash deposits. No source listed. It was enough to suggest she hadn't acted alone. Sarah's investigation led her back to the elderly woman she'd met at the playground. This time, Sarah caught her just as she was coming out of the corner store. "You said I have my mother's eyes," Sarah said. "How do you know that?" The woman's expression softened. "I knew Linda. I was there that day." Sarah's pulse quickened. "You saw what happened?" "I saw a man take you. I yelled, but he was gone before I could move. I told the police, but they said I couldn't give a good description. I never forgot your face." "Do you know who he was?" Sarah asked. The woman hesitated. "I think he lived in that house you visited, but I can't be sure. It's been so long." That night, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling she was being watched. In the mirror above the motel's bathroom sink, she noticed something strange. The locket had tiny letters engraved along the inner rim, so small she'd missed them before. They read, "For L.C., the same initials carved into the playground bench. The engraving in the locket wouldn't leave Sarah's mind. For L.C., it could mean anything, but deep down, she knew it didn't. She had seen those initials before, carved into the bench at the playground. And the way the elderly woman's voice had softened when she spoke of her mother. L.C. wasn't random. It was her mother, Linda Carter. The realization hit her in waves. The locket had belonged to Linda, which meant whoever sent it had been close enough to take something deeply personal from her mother and wanted Sarah to have it now. But why? She decided she had to see the old man in the White House again. This time she wouldn't knock. She would wait. It was late afternoon when she saw him emerge, locking the door behind him and shuffling toward the street. Sarah followed at a distance, careful to keep other pedestrians between them. He walked 3 blocks to a small grocery store, picked up a few items, and began the slow walk home. Sarah waited until he was inside again, then approached the house. She tested the side gate. It wasn't locked. The yard was overgrown, weeds tangling around her boots as she moved toward the back porch. Through a grimy window she saw a cluttered living room. Her eyes landed on the mantelpiece. There, among dusty picture frames, was another photograph of the little girl in the red coat. Her. She froze, heart hammering. Behind her, a voice said, "You shouldn't be here." Sarah spun around. The old man was standing at the gate, his grocery bag on the ground, his expression a mix of fear and anger. "I need to know," Sarah said. "Were you there that day?" His shoulders sagged. "You're her," he murmured, "after all these years." "Who took me?" Sarah demanded. He shook his head. "It wasn't me, but I know who it was. My brother." His name was Charles. The old man, Henry, explained that Charles had been a troubled man, volatile, secretive. On the day Sarah vanished, Charles had shown up at Henry's house with a crying child in a red coat. He said it was temporary, that the child was in danger and needed to be kept safe. Henry had argued, but Charles had threatened him into silence. 2 days later, Charles brought the child to a woman Henry didn't know at the time, Margaret Collins. She gave Charles an envelope of cash. Henry never saw the child again. Sarah's head was spinning. "Why didn't you go to the police?" Henry's voice broke. "I did, but Charles had an alibi, and without proof they said I was just trying to cause trouble. He left town soon after." "Where is he now?" Henry hesitated. "Dead." 10 years ago. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. Her captor was gone. The person who could answer the why was gone. That night, Sarah met Harris at the diner again. She told him everything Henry had said. Harris leaned back, running a hand over his face. "This fits," he said. Charles was questioned early on. No solid evidence. But if what Henry says is true, it means Margaret knowingly took you without legal adoption. Sarah stared at her coffee. She raised me. She fed me. She loved me in her way. But she stole me from my mother. Harris nodded slowly. You have to decide what to do with that. The next day, Harris tracked Margaret to a small house in Vancouver, Washington. He didn't tell Sarah where he was going, but she found out anyway, by following him. She watched from across the street as Margaret opened the door. She looked older, her hair streaked with gray, but her sharp posture was the same. Harris spoke to her for several minutes. Margaret's expression shifted from defiant to weary. Finally, she stepped aside and let him in. Sarah couldn't stop herself. She crossed the street and knocked. Margaret's eyes widened when she saw her. "Sarah," she said softly. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lavender and dust. The walls were lined with photographs, but none from before Sarah was 4 years old. "I need to hear it from you," Sarah said. "Did you know?" Margaret sat heavily in a chair. "I knew. Not at first. Charles told me your mother had abandoned you, said he was helping, but by the time I realized it wasn't true, you were already calling me Mom. I couldn't give you up." "You could have told me the truth," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "I thought I was protecting you," Margaret replied. "I was wrong." Margaret reached into a drawer and pulled out an old envelope. Inside was another photograph, Sarah in the red coat, smiling on the swings. And behind her, blurry but visible, was a man in a dark jacket. Sarah's stomach dropped. "That's him," Henry had said. Harris leaned over her shoulder. "This is enough to connect Charles to the scene. Even if he's gone, it closes the gap in the story." Sarah left Margaret's house with the photograph in her pocket. She walked for hours, past streets she didn't know, until the city blurred into the gray of early evening. She ended up at the playground. The bench was damp, the initials LC. Rough under her fingers. She imagined her mother sitting here, waiting for her, not knowing she was already gone. And for the first time, she let herself cry. Sarah didn't go back to the motel that night. She stayed on the bench at the playground until the streetlights flickered on, casting long, thin shadows over the wet ground. The chain-link fence gleamed under the dim orange glow, and the sound of the swing chains swaying in the cold air seemed louder in the stillness. She kept the locket in her hand the entire time, her thumb brushing the engraved letters over and over. For Elsie. She had never heard her mother's voice, didn't remember her touch, but in this tiny object was proof that she had been loved, proof that someone had been searching for her all these years. When she finally stood, her legs were stiff. She didn't know exactly where she was going, but her feet carried her toward the address Harris had quietly slipped her earlier, the one place she hadn't yet dared to go. The house was in a quiet part of the city, 2 stories tall, its white paint fresh despite the age of the structure. A porch light glowed warmly, and for a moment Sarah stood on the sidewalk staring at it. Her chest tightened with every breath. Harris had told her that Linda Carter had moved back to Oregon after remarrying. He'd also told her that Linda didn't know Sarah was in the city yet. Sarah climbed the steps slowly, each one creaking under her weight. She knocked lightly, half hoping no one would answer, half praying someone would. The door opened. A woman in her late 40s stood there, her hair a mix of chestnut and silver. Her eyes, green, piercing, locked on Sarah's, and in an instant Sarah saw herself in them. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Then Linda's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God!" Sarah's throat tightened. "Mom?" The word felt foreign and familiar all at once. Linda stepped forward, her arms wrapping around her before Sarah could think. It was an embrace that was both fragile and fierce, trembling with the weight of 18 lost years. Inside, the house smelled faintly of coffee and something baking. Sarah sat at the kitchen table while Linda made tea, her hands shaking as she poured the water. "I thought—" Linda's voice broke. She set the teapot down, pressing her hands against the table. "I thought you were gone forever. They told me to give up. I never did." Sarah swallowed hard. "I don't remember you. Not really." Linda nodded. "That's okay. We'll have time." They talked late into the night, filling in pieces of the puzzle. Linda told her about the day she vanished, how she'd been distracted for only a moment, talking to another mother when she turned and Sarah was gone. How the police had searched for months, how every false lead felt like a new wound. Sarah told her about Margaret. She didn't defend her, but she didn't condemn her entirely either. "She raised me. She wasn't cruel. But she lied." Linda's jaw tightened. "She kept you from me." In the days that followed, Sarah stayed with Linda, though the adjustment was awkward at times. They were strangers bound by blood, navigating the space between them with cautious steps. Some mornings, Sarah would wake to the smell of coffee and wonder if she'd dreamt the last week. Harris visited once to update them. "The case will officially be closed," he told them. "Charles is gone, but the evidence we have now confirms what happened. Your mother's name will finally be cleared of those awful rumors." Linda's eyes glistened. "Thank you." Harris nodded. "I just wish we'd gotten here sooner." One afternoon, Sarah went back to Margaret's house alone. She knocked, and when Margaret opened the door, they stood in silence for a long time. "I'm not here to yell," Sarah said. I needed to say goodbye." Margaret's eyes were red. "I loved you." "I know," Sarah said, "but it wasn't yours to take." She handed Margaret the photograph of herself in the red coat. "You should keep this. It belongs with the years we shared." Then she walked away without looking back. A week later, Sarah returned to the playground one last time. The drizzle had returned, misting the air. She sat on the bench, tracing the carved initials with her fingers. She opened the locket and stared at the tiny photograph of Linda inside. For the first time, she could connect the face to a living person, to a voice that had called her name. The chains of the swing creaked behind her, and she turned to see Linda standing there, holding 2 cups of coffee. "I thought you might be here," Linda said, handing her one. Sarah smiled faintly. "Guess it's in my blood." They sat together in the cold, the years of separation still heavy, but no longer insurmountable. The playground was quiet, except for the sound of the swings, moving gently in the wind. Sarah took a deep breath, letting the air fill her lungs. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she was running. Winter settled over Portland like a heavy blanket, the skies dimming earlier each day. The playground was nearly always empty now, its swings stiff with cold, the bench damp from endless rain. But to Sarah, it no longer felt like a place of ghosts. It felt like a marker, a place where one life had ended and another had begun. She came here often in the weeks that followed, sometimes alone, sometimes with Linda. They didn't always talk. Sometimes they just sat and listened to the sounds of the neighborhood, the distant bark of a dog, the wind in the pines, the occasional rattle of the swings. Silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt shared. One afternoon, as they sat on the bench, Linda pulled something from her coat pocket. It was an old photograph, slightly bent at the corners. Sarah recognized it immediately. It was the same image of her in the red coat, standing in front of the swings. "I've kept this with me for 18 years, Linda said, her voice soft but steady. "Every move, every year that passed, I carried it. I thought maybe if I held on to it, I'd be holding on to you, too." Sarah took the photo, her fingers brushing the worn edges. "I've seen this before," she said. "Margaret had it. I don't know how she got it. Linda's jaw tightened, but she didn't ask for details. It's yours now. Sarah slipped it carefully into her coat. No, it's ours. The process of reconnecting wasn't instant. There were moments of frustration, of silence stretched too thin. Linda wanted to know everything about Sarah's childhood. Sarah sometimes couldn't bring herself to speak. Sarah wanted to ask about the years she'd missed, birthdays, traditions, family she never met. But sometimes the answers hurt more than the questions. They learned each other slowly, in small ways, the way Linda always hummed when she cooked. The way Sarah liked her coffee just a little too sweet. The way they both tilted their heads the same when they were thinking. Harris stopped by once more, weeks later. He handed Sarah a small box. Inside was the locket, freshly cleaned, the silver catching the light. "Thought you'd want this back," he said. "It's part of your file now, officially closed." Sarah nodded, her throat tight. "Thank you for not giving up." Harris gave a faint smile. "Some cases never let you go. I'm just glad this one ended here." On the anniversary of her abduction, Sarah and Linda returned to the playground together. It wasn't planned. They both just happened to show up within minutes of each other. The air was crisp, and a pale winter sun broke through the clouds, lighting up the rusted chains of the swings. Sarah looked around, taking in every detail: the sagging basketball hoop, the uneven fence, the initials on the bench. She thought of the little girl she'd been, of the years stolen, of the people who had taken and those who had searched. And she realized something. This place no longer held just pain, it held survival. She turned to Linda. "You know, I used to think I was running toward something, or away from it. I didn't realize I was just trying to find a place to stop." Linda took her hand. "You found it." As they left, Sarah glanced back one last time. The swings moved gently in the wind, creaking softly, almost like a goodbye. The same sound she had heard the first day she stood here again. The same sound that had stirred a memory she didn't understand back then. Now she understood everything. And as they walked away together, Sarah knew this for certain. Some places take something from you, but if you're lucky, they give it back too.